Welcome to the first day of the rest of your life. My name is Andy Zaremba, and as usual, we're recording out of 70 West Cordova Street here in our business float house. And as you can see, I look kind of like an Oompa Loompa today. I'm pretty bronzed up because we just came back from a family vacation. And of course, we spent a little bit of time away with my co-host, as usual, Mike.
Hey, everybody.
You can only hear him because we only have two cameras working at the moment. We really need Omid to come in and fix us up. So if you hear this, which he might listen to this, come on in, man. We need you to help us fix up our setup here because, well, we don't know how to do it. Let's be honest. So
it's true.
Yes.
We're more just the voice and the faces. He's definitely the technicality. So
yes. So
Omid,
we need you. But anyways, Float House, we have some changes going on within the Float House world at the moment.
Here, I'm going to put on the universe for me while I talk. So basically, if you haven't heard, we've decided to close down our Float House Kitsilano location. The lease is up, and we've decided to not renew it and just focus downtown, basically, at Gastown. And we're really excited for a couple reasons because we've been able to kind of use this evolution for our company to make some upgrades to the Gastown Center. Specifically, primarily, we will have 4 of our Oasis tanks, which are the tanks we currently have in all 8 of our float rooms, replaced with 4 ProFloat cabins. ProFloat is actually the only Canadian float tank manufacturer. They're located in Chilliwack, and Chris and Donna, the founders there, and they actually were floaters with us. They're members with us in Gastown when we first opened, and they love floating, connected to it, were inspired, and Chris is an engineer, and so he's like, I'm going to do this. And now he produces these beautiful float cabins, and we've been super fortunate to be able to get our hands on 4 used ones, which we're going to get kind of upgraded a little bit and tweaked up and then put into our rooms sometime in December. So December 2018. So we're really excited to have this because these cabins allow us a bit more of an opportunity to host people with 2 different conditions, I'd say, or 2 different barriers. One would be mobility issues. They're a lot easier to get in and out of. I think is a huge opportunity for people with different types of chronic pain ailments and just body issues to come and use this service.
Well, they have big, huge doors that you basically open up like a walk-in freezer in a sense.
Exactly.
You just step
That's
right
exactly
in.
what it's like.
People with mobility issues have a lot less trouble with these, which is great.
And there's grab bars.
Use it for that reason.
Correct. So there's grab bars involved, and you can get in and out a lot easier. So that's a huge plus on this conversion. Secondly is they're a lot bigger, so they're much more voluminous, and they're way less intimidating than the tanks we have. So the people that are a little bit more intimidated by that confined space experience, we get that a lot. Like, what if I'm claustrophobic? What if you're claustrophobic? There's definitely healthy approaches to approach any type of fear in your life, and we feel that these cabins will make people feel a lot more comfortable for that early going. Eventually you're going to be in there with the lights off and dark, and that perception of the space, it's gone anyways. Mm-hmm. But, at least in the initial, perhaps pre-float anxiety, it's going to reduce that quite a bit, and we're really excited about that as well.
Yeah. And, of course, we're going to have a really good promotion on for the holiday season.
Yes, so stay tuned to that, folks.
Yes, and if you're paying attention to our channels, you'll definitely see that.
No doubt.
And as usual, give a shout-out to the Vancouver Real community, and a big shout-out to Sean and Candace for running the Life in Motion program, which has basically 3 components, which is a movement component, a meditation component, and a nutrition component. And the Life in Motion project is like it's an amazing online product.
It's a beautiful platform.
And they have 3 really key and really good local instructors, Carolyn and Budgel for meditation, Slava Golubov for movement, and then Rochelle for nutrition.
Yes.
And all 3 of them are experts in what they do, and what they put together is an online course where every week you'll get new videos coming through and personalized instruction on how to implement these into your life, plus the whole coaching component as well. There's actually, I forgot to mention Cole and David, who are doing the coaching aspect as well. So we're looking at all areas of your life and helping you build that, well, not all areas, but those foundational areas which will really help you accelerate. So that's the Life in Motion program with Sean and Candace. Oh, and I also have to mention Wise Monkey Coffee Leaf Tea. Could you pass me one of those boxes really quick? They are currently sponsoring the podcast, Wise Monkey Coffee Leaf Tea, and it's an amazing tea. Like I
Yes.
generally am not a tea drinker, and there's a big difference between regular tea and this kind of tea, because this is made from the leaves of the coffee bean tree, which is really great because a lot of times within the coffee industry, I guess,
farmers.
there are downtimes when there's no work on the farms, and
Right.
this can actually turn that downtime into productive work for the people in countries that need the actual income coming in.
Yeah.
So they're utilizing part of the plant that's not utilized at all to create a tea, which actually benefits the people who work on these plantations or farms or whatever they are, where they grow coffee. And not to mention, it's quite delicious. It's really, really smooth tasting, and it doesn't really give you the same. If you have problems with headaches, some people get headaches from tea, and it's because of
Especially green tea.
Especially green tea. But this doesn't do that for whatever reason.
Yeah, there's something that starts with a T.
Yes.
Taramines or something.
Yes.
Something like
well,
that.
Well, if you go back
I
and
don't
listen
know.
to the Max Rivera's podcast,
Yes.
he's the co-founder of Wise Monkey Tea, and he can go into more detail about that. But Wise Monkey Tea, check them out. They're an amazing brand, local, and they're doing some good work on top of what they're doing.
Exactly.
So, Wise Monkey. And, of course, I'm also now the area director for Man Talks Vancouver. Our next event is going to be on November 26th. However, I don't think this will be out before then. But if you'd like to get connected and come out to a Man Talks event, we're going to be having another event in January, on January 16th. And they're awesome events. They're just community getting together, people talking, opening up issues, and having real conversations in a very positive atmosphere. So if you'd like to get connected with that, go to mantalks.com, or you can go to the Man Talks community page as well, and you can get connected there. And of course, Mindful Mass Meditation Mob. We did it wasn't quite a mob. It was more of a small gathering of 15 individuals in the rain.
It's still
But we
consciousness
still did it.
clusters.
A small gang of mindful people.
A small
right.
gang of mindful people. We did a meditation, and I'm sure we'll be hosting other events for Mindful Mass very soon.
Yeah.
That was a lot of... I said we'd keep it quick today, but that wasn't so quick.
I loved
But
every single announcement, especially the coffee, the Wise Monkey. I love that stuff.
The Wise Monkey.
It's very cool.
Is this mic close enough there?
Bring it a little closer.
Okay,
Sure.
cool.
There we go.
Well, I'm really excited for today's interview. In
Me
fact,
too.
I spontaneously was looking for podcast guests, and I'm like, who could I have on? And we had a little Facebook exchange, I think, 2 years ago? Something
Yeah.
about you jumping on the podcast. And like, if you'd like to complete the trifecta of the Maté
That's right.
family,
Yeah.
I'm open to it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, Daniel Maté. So I'm on vacation, and I shoot him a message on Facebook, and he responds right away, which is awesome.
And I happened to be coming to town,
And you happen to come anytime, and it's just all worked out and aligned. And
Meant to
you
be.
are the son of Gabor Maté
yeah,
as
I'm
well.
Gabor's eldest son.
Gabor's eldest son. And also we had your ex-wife, ex-partner,
Yeah.
Tanya Maté on as well, which was
Correct.
another awesome interview.
I love that interview.
And,
actually, it's funny. It's really nice to be back. First of all, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
And the last time I was in the float house was on the morning of my wedding day.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, I woke up early that morning, went for a skinny dip in the Pacific Ocean down at Spanish Banks.
I like it.
As per Jewish custom, apparently, our rabbi
Is that
advised.
that's a thing?
Yeah, actually doing they call it a mikvah. It's the ritual ceremonial bathing or ceremonial
cleansing?
immersion. Exactly.
Interesting.
And so I went down there and did that at like 5 a.m.
Yeah.
And then booked as soon as I don't know what time you guys open.
8
but
a.m.
I was here right at 8, and I did
Wow.
a nice long float to prepare for.
Very nice.
How were you preparing? Was it to calm the nerves or just to get present?
Just to
What
ground
was it?
myself, to
Ground
relax,
yourself, yeah.
I'd probably had my. Yeah, there. You know what? I had laryngitis actually leading up to the wedding. My
that's
voice
rough.
gave out, which is I wore a sign the entire night of we had a some sort of
Wild
family
bachelor
event,
party.
and I said for the first time in my life the groom is speechless, and I just been kind of on vocal rest before the wedding.
Yeah.
Right.
Smart.
And you actually have a number of projects on the go at the moment, one of which is called Hello Again, and it's actually with your father. And I think
Yes.
this one's really interesting. I wanted to dive into that to start off. And you also have another project where it's basically, I would say, coaching, consulting.
Yeah, it's in that realm for sure.
And it's called mental chiropractic service, which is really a really interesting concept. And the website there is walkwithdaniel.com. And I really liked how we were talking before the podcast, how for your sessions with people, you actually don't go into an office in like a clinical session at all. You actually go for a walk with somebody. And I thought that was a really creative and interesting way to engage with somebody. Because, I mean, I imagine it really opens people up.
It does. I think it's beneficial in a lot of different ways. I mean, the idea sprung actually just from a friend of mine pointing out that when he and I go for walks, we have our best conversations. And he said, you know, Daniel, you know, you have all these gifts. You haven't always been very good at monetizing them. But one thing, and that's true about me. You know, I'm 43 and I still feel like I'm maybe on my fifth career or something, or maybe on my very first career. Like I'm still figuring out what it is I do in the world and how to do it. And I've done plenty of things, but it's like how to operate in the world as someone with things to offer and then value for value. That whole domain has been kind of a blind spot for me. And my friend said, you know, something you're extremely good at is walking with people. And it hit me that there's something about walking that brings out the best in me. That's where it started, where somehow when I'm walking with somebody, you notice your perspective is changing with every step. Literally, your perspective is changing. Your point of view changes. It's never the same. And even if you come back to the same place you started, you do a loop or whatever, it looks different than when you started because the time of day is different, because your physiological state is different. You got your heart rate up. Maybe the weather's changed. And that's a nice metaphor for what it is that I intend to accomplish with people, which is to get them unstuck. Mentally unstuck and mentally aligned. So that's why I call it mental chiropractic. I'm not actually a chiropractor, and I'm not trying to horn in on any real chiropractor's business. I just couldn't think. Someone called me a mental chiropractor a couple of years ago in a group retreat setting, and I loved it because it was like, I don't think of myself. I'm certainly not trained as a therapist, and I don't do what my dad does. I do what I do, and what it has to do with is somehow aligning people's thoughts and emotions and perceptions and beliefs with their true intentions.
Well, I'm guessing the apple isn't far too far from the tree, as the saying
goes. I mean, look, a lot of, you know, my training for this, such as it is, has come from a lot of different sources. One of the foundational sources has been the osmosis effect of being the son of who I'm the son of. And I've gone to the sort of Maté school of, you know,
School of life.
And of, you know, and some of that is learning. Yes, obviously, there's my dad's body of work and his way of working with people and his perspective on human development. How could that not deeply influence me, right? And then there's also what I've learned by being his son, just which is its own very intense kind of psycho-emotional cross training.
And this kind of maybe gets into the Hello Again, helloagainproject.com is the website.
You want to talk about
the work you're doing there, and your experience with your father, and how you guys are now sharing that with the world.
So Hello Again is the name of it started out as just a workshop. It was a one-off. We did it here in Vancouver. The Hollyhock Foundation was the one who had us, and we did it just a block from here at SFU Woodwards. That was back in 2016, I guess. And I forget exactly what the impetus for it was. I know Leslie Hoffman, who used to run programs there, who's now at the Open Center in New York City. The three of us had coffee one day, and she's like, I think the two of you on stage doing something would be cool. And we thought, well, why don't we do something about parent-adult-child relationships? And when we said it, we realized, oh my God, no one's really talking about this. And yet it's kind of all pervasive. It's like the water we swim in.
It's a fundamental relationship of humanity.
It is, and there's plenty of literature on parenting a child.
Correct.
And then there's plenty of stuff in the culture about adults dealing with demented parents and dying parents and dead parents.
But what about the middle portion there?
What about that entire middle portion, which if we're
bulk of it?
If we're lucky, it's a good number of decades. You know. What seems to happen in that period of time is we just kind of hold serve. We just kind of maintain. There's a kind of it is what it is mentality because it's kind of unexplored, and it's one of these blind spots where it's like people just assume that it's kind of as good as it's gonna be, and maybe you work on it here and there, and you I don't know. And some people are totally estranged from their parents, and some people,
Right.
people are very close with their parents. But there isn't a sense that it's a realm of exploration and active transformation and inquiry that can shift and grow and open, and that has a clearly defined purpose. We know what the purpose of the parent-child relationship is in childhood. It's to raise a fully grown adult.
Right.
Well, what then? And we're trying, we dove in not knowing the answer, but because we didn't know the answer, and because this was a relationship that has always been or has never been far from the surface for us in terms of dealing with it for both of us. Like, ever since I've been an adult, we've been dealing with our relationship. And so,
What do you mean by dealing with?
talking about it, communicating about it, dealing with the impact of its current level of quality. For whatever reason in our family, we haven't been able to ignore it or push it aside or push it under the surface. And I'm not saying that all families do this, but I do get the sense that in a lot of families,
It's surface level.
Well, I'm not trying to judge anybody. I'm not trying to say it's surface level in the sense, but the status quo is the status quo. It's more or less stable at whatever level of quality, and it's not ever fundamentally questioned. So if it's palsy and chummy and fun and whatever, then that's how it is. And if it's totally estranged and we don't speak to each other, then that's how it is. But there's no other relationship like when you're in a relationship with a spouse or a partner or your own child. You do work on that relationship. Because you're coming from the premise that however it is now, there's something else possible and available, and it's of importance to me. There's stakes. I've got skin in the game, and I want to do what I can to investigate how this could be more satisfying, more generative, more sourceful, more nourishing.
A little bit of backstory on this. When I originally messaged you, it was regarding having you and your father potentially speak at Man Talks. Now,
Yes.
Now that's kind of a pipe dream. I'm like, hey, Daniel, it's on Facebook Messenger, not planning it out at all.
Yeah.
But one thing that we do see, and it's quite a common problem, is especially father-son relationships.
Yes.
That's a big one. And I'm sure there's also mother-daughter problems.
From what I hear,
I'm
the mother-daughter relationship is intense.
Yeah.
That's what we're gathering.
So it's so interesting, right? Like, and again, on your website, the helloagainproject.com.
So there's no the, it's just hello again.
Oh, sorry, helloagainproject.com. It says a fresh start for parents and their adult children, which is what you're touching on right now.
Yeah.
And there is that middle section, and here's the thing: I feel like nobody gets through childhood unscathed. No parent is going to do a perfect job with their children, ever. No child isn't going to have a little bit of resentment towards their parents simply because it's like they're the ones putting restrictions and limitations on me. They're the ones saying, I can't do this. I have to come home on a curfew. I have to get good grades. I have to be this. All these different expectations that might be projected onto the child as well. So many different factors. So now it's like the parent and the child as adults almost need to heal that relationship somehow. Or maybe not everybody, but I'm sure a lot of people have issues that are unresolved.
Well, yeah.
And I've also heard this before you keep going, is that one of the bigger conflicts that can happen in people's lives is like at end of life situations with unresolved issues like that. So it's like all of a sudden it's like you want to say something to your mom or your dad, and now it's like this is the last time you're going to say it. And maybe they're in, the last week, last month of their life, potentially.
So you're about to turn 40?
I'm about to turn 40.
So how old were you in 1987?
80, oh, God. Make me do math.
No,
on
you're
air.
8.
8.
Do you remember a song on the radio called The Living Years by Mike and the Mechanics?
I can't say I do.
So Mike Rutherford was an original member of Genesis, right, with Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins. He was like the less well-known one. But he had a band called Mike and the Mechanics. And they had a song, I think it was a #1 hit on the radio in 1987 called The Living Years. And it's all about what he didn't get to say to his father before he died.
Right. Okay.
And
So there's
the
a common
the chorus goes, it's too late when we die to admit we don't see eye to eye.
Right. Okay. So that's very... So there can be really terrible end of life discussions and awful, and what a terrible way to have to go out if it's under some sort of conflict, or maybe it gets resolved and then you have like a day of peace, and So let's prevent that from happening. And I also think potentially some of the work that you and your father have participated in with some of the medicines and things like that may have opened you up to these type of conversations, and maybe that's why you're pioneering this sort of uncharted waters.
Well, I think we're careful about giving the impression that somehow any particular exposure to any particular
Okay,
modality
right. I
is
shouldn't have
necessary.
said- yes.
I mean, in our particular family with our particular story, plant medicines have come along and they've been an ally and a tool and a very powerful opening. For some people, it's an illness. For some people, it's a vacation that goes a certain way. For some, our lessons come along in various forms, and we could talk about the various, pros and cons of psychedelics. But it's that's not at the source of what has us be interested in this. I have had some powerful, insights and openings with regards to my father in particular in the medicine space. But I think more centrally, what you're talking about is there's just a universal, because let's face it, plant medicines are still kind of a niche thing in society right now. They haven't gone mainstream. But what's totally universal is what you said. And here's the funny part. You read the work of a certain Dr. Gabor Maté, and it becomes very clear that as you said, no one comes out of childhood unscathed. Not just necessarily because of resentments due to restrictions and the sort of things that parents do to protect their kids, but very early childhood. My dad's very conception of trauma, which is not, I don't think it's original to him, but he's been popularizing it and speaking about it and bringing it more and more into the mainstream. The trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you. It's the split inside the self that happens as a result of a very terrible bargain we have to make, which is we need to be attached to our parents, we need to be connected, and yet we also are trying to become ourselves. But what if the family environment isn't emotionally capable of holding the fullness of who we are? Then there becomes this split. And all of us, in some way or another, particularly in a society that's not set up to maximize human wholeness, as ours isn't, which is going to be the subject of his next book, which I'm helping him write, which we can talk about.
Very cool.
We're going to, at some point in childhood, experience some sort of disconnection from ourselves. Now, the parent-child relationship is very interesting. Is it okay if I just riff a bit?
Yeah,
Please,
Right.
please.
So it's unlike any other relationship in the world, if you think about it, the parent-adult-child relationship. What's different about it is that, let's say my best friends in the world, I met them in university, two guys I lived with. So, 25 years ago or so, Montreal, we were all 18 or 19. And we've all grown since then. We're all middle-aged men now. So we're, clearly we're not the same people that we were. But when we met, we were at a relatively equal footing in terms of development. We were in the same place in life, and our lives have gone in totally different ways, but it is kind of a consistent, like the sea has risen at the same pace and level. Well, think about, and same thing with friends and even, partners, even if you're with someone of a slightly different generation, it's not that radically different. With your parents, when you met them, basically, they were a person and you were not a person.
Yeah.
I mean, you were a human being, but you hadn't yet become, your brain neurologically was soup.
Yeah.
And you
No
were
persona.
What's that?
No persona.
No persona, no
had-
personality, no traits.
One of
Just
our
maybe
past guests referred to babies as a screaming potato.
a screaming potato. You were a screaming potato. That's right. And their job was to take care of this screaming hot potato and bring it to maturity. So you had two human beings who, when they met, were at diametrically opposite poles of maturity, responsibility, and dependence. And the nature of their relationship mandated it thus. That's not an aberration. So you talk about a power dynamic. My dad and I have been talking about power dynamics lately. It's kind of a touchy subject sometimes between us. But the power dynamic between parents and kids at first is natural and it's good. You want that, right? Now, fast forward 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later. You've either become a full-grown adult or you've become someone who looks like a full-grown adult and sometimes acts like one.
Yeah.
In my case, that would be the case, right? I resemble an adult. I'm a facsimile of an adult, and my dad is basically, the same person he was, but more mature, more hopefully wiser, more chill, all of that. Well, now we're trying to have a relationship on something like an equal footing. Can I swear on this podcast?
Of course. Yep.
How in the fuck are you going to do that? How are you supposed to do that?
Right.
And that is a question that, as far as I can tell, every single human being who's ever been born has to deal with. It's a big question. And that's the question we're setting out to inquire into and explore with this.
If it's not dealt with, what sort of ways can it manifest?
Can the not dealing with it manifest?
Yeah, like maybe like
all kinds of ways.
If someone can, yeah, like maybe like, and if there's any general ways, like people can like look at their own relationships, be like, yeah, maybe we're not there.
Yeah, well, so so there's different. There's a fair amount of variation in human beings.
Tons.
Ultimately, there are patterns,
Right.
and what we're doing in this work is we're trying to identify some of those patterns. But so it's like a limited amount of it's variation within a certain
Right.
framework. So in some families, it looks like total estrangement.
Right.
That what the child, as they become an adult, has decided is that now that I no longer need these. Usually, it's not always. It can go in one of two directions with estrangement. So the child can say, you know what, I don't need these people anymore, and it's just not worth the effort. It's not worth the blood, sweat, and tears, the emotional labor. This is the crucible in which I was originally traumatized, and I refuse to keep re-triggering myself by exposing myself to these people. I don't see them capable of growing, or at least I can't grow in their presence. So I'm going to keep them at least an arm's length, and some people go to the more extreme step of completely cutting off contact. But I think it's more common to see people who are functionally estranged, who see each other at holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the occasional phone call, and that's it. And that's how they manage it. And that's just how it looks. And here's the thing, it works for them. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not saying there's anything wrong with any of these scenarios because it's true. They're right. They don't need them anymore. And as an adult, you have the right to live your life however you want. And then some parents, disown their kids for, say, religious or cultural reasons, or because they're homophobes, or whatever.
Whatever reason.
Whatever
Sure.
reason. So that can happen too.
Yeah.
There's other ways it looks, though. And one of the things we've been doing is identifying some of the prototypes, the different ways that parents show up in parent-adult-child relationships, and the ways that adult children show up. So, for instance, the parent, and my dad was the one who sort of started pointing these out, looking at himself. There's the guilty parent, the one who is hyper aware. Maybe this parent, he or she has read all of Gabor Maté's books and is certainly, my dad is one of them, and hyper aware that, oh my God, human children develop as a function of the environment. And oh my God, when that kid was young, I was a mess. And oh my God, I see them struggling and suffering now. And oh my God, they are, what they're struggling with is sort of a causal function of where I failed. Well, in one sense, and now, I've had people say to me, it must be nice to have parents who are willing to acknowledge how they parented you affected you. Because there's some parents who go in the opposite direction. They're just totally in denial. Or they take it's your life now. It's not my fault. Don't blame me. They avoid, And in one sense, it is nice. But the downside of being in relationship with a guilty parent, and again, no person is in any one prototype all the time. These are sort of modes or programs we slip into.
Right.
Think of them as like computer programs. You press run, it just runs. So the problem that I can ask you, what would be the downside of being in a relationship with a parent who's guilty all the time about how they raised you?
What would be the downside of that? They're maybe always trying to compensate for it.
Possibly. It sucks to be seen as someone else's failure.
Right.
If my job as a human being is to become fully myself and to take ownership of my life and to feel good about myself, and I may not, I may have regrets, I may not like everything about myself, I don't want to be a grandiose narcissist, but I'm trying to become someone who can stand on his own 2 feet. Well, anytime there's these 2 people who, anytime I get around them, I'm reminded of what a drag I am, because I seem to remind them of their failures. Well, that's no fun.
Right.
And not only that, see, our template is what we're looking for when we say a fresh start for parents and their adult children. We're talking about, is it possible to have a relationship that's grounded in the present moment? And a guilty relationship is not grounded in the present moment.
That's in the past, for sure.
So that's an example of a prototype for the parents. The other prototypes for parents would be the victim parent, the one who feels wounded by their child and is, essentially, look at everything I've done for you, and the sort of martyr thing.
Right.
And then there's the child parent who needs the child to take care of them emotionally.
Right.
And parents kind of cycle through these, right? For the adult kid, just briefly, the prototype that I'm most, and we'll be speaking about this all this weekend at this retreat, this workshop, not a retreat, a workshop. There's the aggrieved child. And at the workshop, I like to play one of my favorite songs from when I was a teenager, which is from an album that just turned 30 Years Old, and Justice for All by Metallica.
Okay.
The last song on that album is called Dyer's Eve. And the lyrics go, "Dear mother, dear father, what is this hell you have put me through? Believer, deceiver, day in, day out, live my life through you. Pushed onto me what's wrong or right, hidden from this thing that they call life." And it's, of course, this thrash metal, speed metal,
Right.
ferociously angry cry from the heart about a grown man who is still aggrieved at his parents. And boy, oh boy, do I relate to that song. That is a mode that I can get into, because that feeling of aggrievement and that you're never going to understand me, that's something that is strong in me.
And what does it tell you that Metallica actually wrote a song about that? It's a common experience.
It is a common experience, yeah. And that rock and roll, I mean, the quintessential rock and roll statement is Rage Against the Machine. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me, right?
Yeah.
Now
And
that's
it taps into that-
that's a political statement in their case, but it taps into this sense of like this arbitrary authority structure that I grew up in is not legitimate. I didn't choose it. It does not have my best interests and needs in mind. And fundamentally, what it's saying is, underneath all the anger and the bluster and the guitar solos, it's saying, you really hurt me, dudes. Like, you really hurt me, and you don't see me, and
Like-
and you left me with. And actually, the Metallica song ends with a very vulnerable. You know, he says, "I'm in hell without you. Cannot cope without you too. Shocked at the world that I see. Innocent victim, please rescue me." So there's this cry for love, for acceptance, but there's also this despair that it's never going to come. And I think that is very common for a lot of people.
Well, I'm sure there's, again, those relationships that never get healed properly or never get processed properly. The conversations never happen until maybe, at the very
right.
last minute, or it's too late.
That's right.
And it's really interesting too how that theme sort of manifests in, say, more aggressive, angry music, if you want to call it that. Now, here's the thing. I definitely went through my heavy metal phase, and punk rock phase, for sure. I went through all that as well.
You know what's interesting,
And-
of course, just a
Yeah,
little side note.
okay.
You take a look at hip hop.
Right.
Songs
Yeah.
about parents. There are some, Notorious B.I.G. had a line about, how his dad didn't raise him, so he's a secondhand bastard and all that. I mean, in hip hop, there's a lot of people dealing with the trauma of a missing parent or
Yeah.
a stressed parent, but there's also a lot of love. You look at Dear Mama by Tupac, or Ghostface's All That I Got Is You,
true.
like this real reverence for parents.
Yep.
That
Yep.
that points to maybe another prototype, which is the dutiful one, the one who could never possibly pay back all of the love and the. Now, there's nothing wrong with genuine gratitude. I'm not trying to pathologize Tupac. I think he genuinely loved his mother, but one of the other, there's the self-sacrificing child who's always there no matter what, and they end up taking on more than they can handle, and they end up resenting, and these are the people that my dad would say probably get sick the most.
Right.
And then there's the child who just isolates and is like, I'm out of here. So
Right.
that's the.
Right. So those
But
are
you were saying
those are
about
sort of
aggressive
like
music, yeah.
right. I was just saying how it manifests in that.
couldn't resist talking about Tupac.
No, I think it's amazing because obviously they're tapping into something, and there's a whole thing. There's an audience for it, so obviously other people are experiencing that, or else people wouldn't be listening and resonating with that music.
Totally.
So it's a very common experience.
Totally.
Now you went through some of those archetypes, if you want to call them that, of different types of parents.
We call
and
them prototypes.
Prototypes, sure. Now, how do we get from those prototypes, and I'm sure it's different from every situation.
Yes.
But how do we start? How do we even start? How do we start with any situation that we might be in?
Well, that's great. And this is where, my dad's principle of compassionate curiosity, which I'm sure you've heard him speak about, is it's really helpful, actually.
Can you outline that for us?
I will. I mean, it'll be secondhand.
Yeah, that's okay.
But I'm reminded of a quote I read the other day from Joni Mitchell, to go to the other side of the musical spectrum, who's someone I also just love. And in 1978, I think when she was 35, she was talking about her own relationship issues. And she said, I'm working on it. And then she stopped herself. She said, I don't really want to say I'm working on it because it implies too much effort. She says, I'm noticing. I'm just starting to notice it. And what I really heard in that is exactly what my dad means by compassionate curiosity, which is that these patterns are deep. These patterns are not conscious. They're not moral failures. We're not even choosing them. They're certainly not choices. I don't wake up in the morning and be like, okay, cool. 2 p.m. today, I'm going to get triggered by something my parents say, and I'm going to flip into aggrieved mode, and then I'm going to take it out on them for an hour, and then I'm going to feel really guilty about myself. No one chooses that.
Right.
The program runs itself. Well, how do you
Right.
dismantle? How do you diffuse? How do you reprogram something? Well, you don't make the program wrong. You just get interested about it. And one of the reasons we're calling these prototypes is so that people can get curious. Oh, okay, so everyone does it. Everyone's got their version. What's mine? How do I tend to show up the most? What are the trigger points that throw me into that mode? What does it feel like when I'm in that mode? Start to get forensic about the shit. Like, you investigate the experience as opposed to telling. See, what we do is we get caught up in the story. Well, the story is mom said this and she always says this, and when she's this is I have to, so on and so forth, and all of the reasons and the justifications, and now we're back in the past, we're not in the present.
Right.
If we're in the present, and this is, any good meditator will tell you this, you just be with your experience. You separate out, okay, there's what's happening out there, but let me focus on over here. Okay, if I notice that when I get around my dad, my jaw gets clenched, there's a tightness in my chest, there's some kind of constriction in me, nervous system-wise, physiologically.
Yep.
Well, that's interesting. It's not right, it's not wrong. But it's interesting.
It's what's happening.
It's what's happening, and it's really what's happening. All that other shit is not what's happening.
Right.
That's just my story about it. So part of it is divesting from the story, being willing to say, okay, you can tell the story if you want. There's nothing wrong with it. It's actually kind of innocuous, but it's just not going to get you anywhere, and it can get you stuck if you would try to insist on trying to solve the issue inside of the drama, because it just generates more drama. Being able to stop, and this does not mean doesn't mean be complacent, doesn't mean be passive, doesn't mean you always have to like what the other one does or tolerate being treated in ways you don't like. Not at all. It just does mean pressing pause and seeing if you can create a gap between the stimulus and the reaction so that you can find a genuine response.
Right. That's where
Finding
that
your own-
mindfulness practice, meditation
Sure.
can really be helpful.
It
with
can, but I am not going to sit here and tell people they have to meditate in order to be mindful, because I'd be a hypocrite. I can't meditate. I did a Vipassana retreat this summer. I was a woeful failure at it. I've got no interest in having a daily meditation practice. Probably someday I should, but as long as I should, I'm not going to do it, because it's that.
I recently just took it on, and
Good for you.
And I find it
Good for you.
immensely beneficial.
I'm sure it is. And mindfulness comes in a whole lot of forms.
Yes.
It really does.
Yes.
For me, it's taking walks. For me, it's I could do a breathing practice every day. The Wim Hof breathing practice I find really helpful. The Iceman dude.
Yep.
When I do that, I'm more grounded.
Yep.
And sometimes I don't do it. But even just the noticing, without having to take on some elaborate new thing, just having the intention. Because see, this is the thing, and this feeds into my mental chiropractic work. On some level, there's always some intention operating, and it's usually not the one we think.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to know what your intention is, I'm borrowing this from some teachers of mine, but
Well,
if you want to know what your intention is, look at your results. Look at what's actually happening. So on some level, I have to admit, oh my God, there's some part of me that actually intends to keep the drama going.
Right. Well, and that's something that somebody we were talking about on a different conversation actually talks about a lot with Jordan Peterson. He says, like, if you want to know what someone believes, it's more about not what they say. It's about like what do they do
And how are they acting? Yeah.
How they, that's your belief system. It's
would
like
agree with them
you
100%.
act out your beliefs. So it's interesting.
The one way of saying it is you always win the games you're playing.
Interesting.
We're just not straight about the game we're playing, and that gets us into trouble. If we could just say, you know what, Dad, right now my only intention is to make you wrong. What I'm up to right now, the game I'm playing is proving that you're guilty and proving that you're impossible. And I'm going to play that game for a little while. You know what? That would create so much more freedom and peace if we could just admit that. And when I do, like I said to my dad yesterday morning, Dad, sometimes I hate you. I hate your guts, and all I'm interested in is being in that hateful place. He said, thank you. Thank you for telling me that. When I'm pretending like I'm not full of hatred,
right.
That's when we get into trouble, because now we're doing a con on ourselves, and we're angry at the other for not buying it.
And it's kind of like passive aggressive. It sort of leaks out in different ways.
Or aggressive in my case.
Right.
I can get really angry. So getting curious about our true intentions, or what our let's say our operative intentions, our default intentions. These are the programs we don't choose. Say, oh right, there's this program running, and when I'm in victim mode, I'm trying to be a victim, and when I'm in aggrieved mode, I'm trying to stay aggrieved. Okay, that's there. is there anything else there? What's it like to be in aggrieved mode? What's it like to be a victim? Oh, I'm tired. I'm sad. See, the minute I can just admit what's happening, I can actually start to locate some other emotions that are true. I miss my dad. I miss my mom when I'm in that stage. It hurts to be in this constant state of conflict. This is something Donald Trump has no ability to do, is to stop and say, how does it actually feel to be the way I'm being right now? So if I can get to that, then I don't need to work so hard at like changing my behavior. All of a sudden I can act, a new intention may spring up naturally, which is, okay, my intention in this conversation is to hear you. Or my intention in this conversation is to speak in a way that you can hear me. That's a whole different ballgame. Right. And it's probably a ballgame that I'm less practiced at, which is part of why we don't go there, because the other one's really familiar. Mm-hmm. But it's the start of a fresh start, really.
And for either of those positions, whether you're trying to really be heard or to hear, you do have to be very present to do that.
Absolutely.
Because if you're not, you're already in this story of like, I know what I'm going to say before you're even done talking. You're not even there with the person.
That's right. And when there's something at stake that's really important to you, you're immediately present. You don't have to work at being present. Like, let's say that I told you right now that on the other side of the town, there's a medical emergency involving someone that you really care about. And the only way for you to get there is to get in your car right now and drive.
Boom.
How fucking focused would you be on that drive? Laser.
Yeah.
Nothing would be able to touch you. You wouldn't be checking your phone. You may not even notice the traffic. You'd just be moving through it. Mm-hmm. And you'd find out, you'd get there. And if it was on the other side of the country, you'd be there by morning and money wouldn't be an issue.
And it's wild. Yeah, no, and it's amazing how they would just flip that switch and you're there.
That's exactly right. Now, why is that? Because the environment changes such that the stakes are clear and the intention is right there. You're single-minded. And you're going to win at that intention. Well, that's how powerful we are, actually. When we get our intentions aligned with our thoughts, human beings are amazing.
Oh, yeah.
The only problem with human beings is we're not clear on what our intention really is.
That's
true. And we're acting like we don't want to take responsibility for what our intention really is, because it's easier to say, well, I tried.
And do you even know what your intention is?
Or even know what your intention is. Sometimes we just don't know. And that also comes out of, I think, the trauma of being disconnected from ourselves, and a relationship is an environment, and so when you're trying to do it by yourself in your own life, it's hard enough, but then you get, my dad and I talk about sort of planetary gravity, and you get into the orbit of this other planet who exerts this pull on you, and it just like it's like a massive magnet that just pulls your brain to one side and
it just sucks you in.
Yeah, and you feel concussed. And I've physically experienced, and certainly in the past 4 years. Around the time that I got engaged and got married, this before we broke up, but around the time that I got into that relationship, I started to viscerally experience in a new way how the energy of not my parents as people, but the gravitational field of that relationship knocks me off balance physically. And I would come away from dinners with them with a headache or feeling concussed or depressed for a couple of days. And I think that was hard for my parents sometimes because they took it personally, as if I was like blaming them for it. But it was more just like I was sinking into, or it was like I didn't have the option of ignoring or pushing down or denying. Wow, these people really affect me. And they always have. And all of the ways that I've developed to cope on top of that, all of my personality, my persona, like you said, it can't protect me anymore. And so it's almost like I've been drawn into this work with my dad inexorably, like the Millennium Falcon being pulled in by a tractor beam on the Death Star. Now, my parents are not the evil empire.
Not all the time.
I see them that way, but that's
if
not
you want to see how
are.
evil, just YouTube Gabor Maté, and you'll see you'll see Darth. No, you see the dark Sith.
He does have a low sort of voice.
That's a pretty good Gabor impression right there.
Yeah, I can't quite do the Hungarian sexy mumble.
Yeah, sexy mumble.
Not bad.
Well put.
Yeah.
So keep going. You were whatever you were going on about.
Well, we were talking about how there's these mechanisms that just influence your consciousness. You get concussed by it.
Yeah. So these planetary bodies exert an influence, and
yes.
I think you know what, the same. Let's give the devil his due. The devil. I can't stay away from these metaphors. Let's be fair.
Freudian.
It goes in the other direction too.
Yes.
I mean, I have to. I
Undoubtedly,
happen to think it's
yes.
different, and it should be different. But parents around their kids, it's very intense. And, and their kids, I mean, because because it's love. My dad often speaks. The first thing he says when we get on stage together is, "How is it that we get from this moment where this blue-skinned space alien who pops out of my wife and enters the world, and I hold him and I cry tears of joy and gratitude. One day we're there, and 5 years later or 3 years later I'm hitting him across the face because he won't sing me happy birthday. That's the famous, that's Gabor's low point as a parent, as far as he knows. I can name some others.
Right.
But or how does it that 20 years later or 40 years later we can't even have a conversation? Well, that love is never goes away, and it's instinctual. And I'm not a parent yet, so I don't. Are either of you guys parents?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know it, right?
Oh yeah.
It's
It's
deep.
crazy.
Well,
it's yeah.
Good
And
luck
it's-
shaking that one.
Right, and it's
And
probably very
no, it doesn't
confusing,
happen.
right? Because you have this legit love as a parent for your child, but then you have
Well, you have
all
to-
these complications and all these forces on top of it that are creating this weird distortion.
That's right.
And
also
it's
have-
probably hyper confusing and really hard to understand.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I
And-
was going to add, you have to raise the child responsibly too, to be a socialized member of society, so they're not completely antisocial or outcast in any way. There's this phrase that I remember sometimes. It's first you have to learn what the rules are, then you can break the rules, or first you learn what they are, then you can learn about breaking them, then you can change the rules or something like that.
Right.
And it's so important that our children are socialized properly. And it's like we do have to sort of crush them down into this sort of conformed version of what a human is. And then at that point, now it becomes their duty to express themselves as an adult later on.
Yeah,
But the thing
I
is,
mean,
if you have a child that's completely not socialized, I mean, you're going to have, a criminal potentially.
Sure. I mean, and there's wide range of philosophies on how to do that.
Yes.
And maybe Jordan Peterson is on one side of the spectrum and Gabor Maté is on another side of the spectrum. We were talking about how cool it would be to see the two of them have a conversation.
I still think that'd
sometime.
be cool.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
But the point is, however you choose to do it, that is your job. That's the job. That's your mission should you choose to accept it. And the minute the child is born, you've chosen to accept it. So, and it's mission impossible.
Right.
It is.
Can you get out unscathed?
Can
No.
you get out unscathed? Can you get out without committing an egregious error? No, probably not. Can they get out unscathed? No. So then, okay, well then how do you deal with that reality? How do you come to peace with that reality? And once they're an adult and they're no longer, and it's also the question of because they never stop being my parents. You're never not going to be your kids' parents.
It's true.
Right.
Right? But what's the appropriate shift that needs to take place? And what makes it difficult? And of course, the guilt makes it difficult, and the dutifulness makes it difficult because we're still stuck in the past. I'm still treating my parents as if they have all this power over me that they no longer do. But it's a paradox because in some sense, they always will have that authority. There's a kind of hierarchy, a vertical hierarchy that should be there, generations.
Right.
The respect, all of that.
Right, respecting your elders, that sort of thing.
But that's different than a power structure that's crushing me and limiting
And
my
I shouldn't have
growth.
said crushing. I should have said forming. That would have been a better word to use when referring to children.
No, that's
but
good.
you know what I mean.
You just gave away the game. You're playing.
But
But I'm not. But yeah.
I was going to ask a little more question around your father because he's super introspective and he thinks about these things all the time.
Yes.
So where, in terms of let's say the power dynamic aspect between you and your father, where does he struggle with letting go of the authority figure and becoming more of a almost like a peer in a sense?
You'd have to ask him.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak for him.
Right.
He has.
I thought it might have come up in conversation. That's
He
why.
has. I mean, but I think it's still not fully formed. I think we're still struggling our way through it.
Right.
I know that my dad sometimes bristles when I talk about a power dynamic between us because I think he thinks I mean that
He's trying to dominate.
that
in
it's
some
an
way.
illegit. Yeah, exactly. That he's trying to dominate me, and I'm just saying, no, Dad. I'm just your son. And it's a tale as old as time. It's like
Totally.
it's archetypical.
Yes.
And this is Jordan Peterson. I'm sure has lots to say about this. It's Oedipus. It's
Right.
It's the struggle between
Saturn eating his son.
Right.
Right.
It goes
the
all the way back to
it's
the
the
myths.
tyrannical father. It's,
Right. And I think from my father, if I had to take a guess, and he'll be listening to this, and I could be totally wrong, but what I observe is that because my dad is very highly attuned to the guilty parent prototype, it can sound to him when I talk about universal archetypes like a father eating his son. See, it's obvious to other people. I talk to a therapist, I talk to a friend, I talk to a lover or a spouse or whatever, and they're like, yeah, there's like a competition, there's a power struggle between your dad. Fathers and sons do that. Parents and children do that. I bring it up with my dad, and I think it can sound to him like I'm saying, I don't want to be responsible for my own power. You're keeping me down. And there is this paradox, because on the one hand, he has a point. One of the best things he ever said to me, one of the wisest things he has ever said to me, was just prior to the first time we led the Hello Again workshop. We were writing an article together, I think, or maybe I was editing his article, which I've been sort of his editor, and I'm now going to be his co-writer, but I've been his editor since Hungry Ghosts.
Cool.
So for over 10 years. And I was making a suggestion, and he wasn't giving it the time of day that I wanted him to. And I got really frustrated. We were on the phone. I said, God damn it, Dad, when are you going to treat me like an equal? Like a peer, like you said. And my dad, in his calm, Zen way that always pisses me off when I'm upset, said, Daniel, I can't make you my equal. And it felt like I'd been stabbed in the heart. I felt like I'd been punched in the breadbasket, And I couldn't speak. And he said, and I also can't make you not my equal. Only you can do either of those things.
Well, okay, so that's a call for you to rise up.
A call for me to rise up. Now, I embrace that. That's beautiful. That is true. And it's also true that whether he knows it or not, and whether he likes it or not, he's always going to have a certain kind of position in the totem pole because he's my dad. And you can call that power, you can call that authority, it can be used for good because that's what gives rise to things like mentorship and, vertical transmission of generational wisdom and all that. But I find the more he resists it, the more he doesn't want that to be the case, the more we're like two dogs. Now we're in the we're in the cockfighting realm. We're really struggling.
The
for
egos
power.
are clashing.
The egos are clashing, right? So what I'm my constant struggle is to be like, just acknowledge how it is for a son. And I sometimes ask him, I'm like, he hasn't talked to me much about his relationship with his own father. He's spoken a lot about his relationship with his mom.
Right.
Every talk he gives, I was a child in the Budapest ghetto in Hungary, a Jewish child, and my mother, so on and so. We all know the story of my grandmother.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to know, and it's still kind of opaque to me, and I hope I get to learn more about it as we do these workshops and write this book. And he's spoken about it a bit. I find it fascinating. What was it like for him with his dad? My grandfather, who I had a very close relationship with, and I know he didn't always have the easiest relationship with him. And see, the minute he starts talking about that, all of a sudden my dad becomes something that is very precious to me, which is relatable. And I want my dad. I know a lot of people in the world find my father relatable. Gabor Maté is very relatable and compassionate, right? To me, as his son, there's been a relatability gap.
Sure.
And when he starts speaking about something that he struggled with as a son, then all of a sudden we have something in common.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
So I find myself hungry for that, and I'm trying to, pull that out of him and creating the space where he feels safe enough to share that stuff with me.
I think that conversation is another workshop, maybe a full retreat actually.
Probably, yeah.
For father-sons, because that dynamic is super common.
Yeah.
And I've been involved with men's work for a few years, and this whole theme of father-son dynamics is like one of the most important ones that gets looked at.
It really is.
And healing the relationship with the father is so critical to becoming a fully integrated man and adult. And I think if you and your father dove into that, which I'd love to hear that conversation one day, it would be an amazing thing.
I think we're getting there. It's like with this book and this workshop, we've said it from the beginning. We have nothing figured out. We are not an exemplar of how a relationship should look. By God, we're not. people should not mimic us in any way.
Well, what would be an exemplar, right? I mean,
Well,
what's a perfect relationship?
Exactly. What we're an exemplar of is being willing. And we're going first, and we're willing to talk. We're willing to get on a stage and kind of put our relationship on blast, in a sense, to put it on loudspeaker and not on blast, on loudspeaker, and let people see it so they can see themselves in it. It's not about like.
Well, no, you know,
the first
sometimes
time. Sorry.
That's okay.
The first time this is a funny story. The first time we did this workshop, obviously there was some feelings about it in the family at large, and my brother, bless him, very wisely said, he's like, I don't know, Daniel, like you and Dad are just, you're not typical. Like, what do you really have to teach anyone? Just don't, make sure it's not about you. Just make sure it's not all a big performative show about how enlightened and self-aware the Matés are, because first of all, we're not, and secondly, we're just, like, other families don't play by the same rules. You know, they don't talk about this stuff as much. Make sure it's about the people. And that's been a really important guidance, so that our
Very cool.
example is just an example of universal dynamics that we're identifying and bringing to the surface.
Right. Well, just not to bring it up too much, but the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, one of the reasons he's really skyrocketed up to fame, other than the political issues, was more his relatability to men, and that's why his audience is very masculine in general.
It is,
And I really do think, like, the conversations that you guys are exploring right now is like, it's a big one. I think it's a big one that I'd love to hear your father's thoughts on it one day. And like, I think
me too,
because you know, talking about putting your relationship on blast, you know, a lot of times our pain becomes our greatest gift to the world.
Yep.
Well, it
certainly
like
has
you
been.
can make that example of, you know, the problems that you've have faced and potentially even overcome one day.
Yes.
How many people could that help?
Well, that's always been the case in my creative work. So I'm not sure if you already mentioned, but I'm a musical theater writer first and foremost. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and
mention
it. It's not like I have anything to plug
and
right now.
that's on danielmatte.com.
Yeah, Daniel Maté, and a woefully out-of-date website that has a bunch of stuff about me as a musical theater writer. I studied musical theater writing at NYU.
Cool.
Got my MFA in music and lyrics for theater, and I write musicals. And I never thought I was going to do that. I was a songwriter, but it was, for me, I tried to be a singer-songwriter in my 20s. Like, I thought I was going to be the male Ani DeFranco. You know, like,
Who's that?
Who's that?
I'm obviously.
You guys really are masculine, aren't you?
I don't
know who Ani is.
Oh, come on! Don't hegemonic masculinity stereotype me now. But yeah, I don't know who that is.
She was a very prolific, fiercely independent, eloquently feminist, very funny, and ridiculously musically gifted singer-songwriter.
Gotcha.
In the first 7 years of her career, she put out 10 albums,
Wow.
all self-produced, self-financed, on her own record label, and she influenced everyone from Alanis to, you name it.
Very cool. Nice.
And I loved her stuff, and I learned to play guitar listening to her, and I used to write these angsty singer-songwritery songs, also filtering in my more masculine influences like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and Metallica and whatever else, on acoustic guitar. But I found that it just was kind of too much of a limited frame. So I got into musical theater because, hey, now I can write songs where I create characters who are not me, but they can channel my angst. And they can channel the things I find funny and channel my weird point of view on things and create shows, which is like this kind of phantasmagoric world on a stage, which represents, and musical theater is kind of psychedelic. People are talking and then all of a sudden they're singing, So just in terms of what you were saying, in terms of, that our wounds are our biggest gifts, Michael Mead says that. I don't know if you know him, the mythologist. He's got a great podcast called Living Myth. He's a storyteller.
Nice.
He's fantastic.
I'll check it out.
And he talks about how our greatest wounds are often our greatest, the site of our greatest gifts. And that's always been the case in my creative work. When I tell the truth about what life has been like for me, when I get as much specific with myself as I can, that's all of a sudden when I tend to write something that people say hits home universally.
Right, and you said that a lot of the work that you do with your coaching practice will parallel the writings that you do in your composing as well.
Well, I think it's just all, somehow it's congruent. I mean, if I look at my life from a certain perspective, my career, it looks like a hodgepodge. But fundamentally,
You're the underlying theme.
I am the underlying theme, but then the question is, who am I? What is it about me? And
That's a good question.
It's the question, right? Like, who am I? What am I here for? And I've been trying to answer that in the past few years. And what I've arrived at is that what I'm here for is there's a particular human experience that lights me up more than any other, which is people being free and clear. People seeing something so clearly that they get free. You know how Jesus said the truth will set you free? And I think Alcoholics Anonymous adds on the caveat that, but first it'll piss you off.
Right.
You know,
Right.
but Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Now, I'm not a Christian, but Jesus was a righteous Jew, and he said some true ass things, and that was one of them. And
Right.
and what I take from that is that when we can see things, when we're stuck on anything, when we're struggling with anything, when we're stuck in anything, it's a function of how we're looking at it. And if we can look at it in a way that brings, maybe it's not the capital T truth, but it brings a kind of alignment and a kind of, it comes into focus. We put on the right set of lenses for the moment, for the lighting, for the object we're trying to see. We can see it, and now we're free. There's a clarity. And I love that. And I love it when a song can do that, because all of my favorite music does that for me, whether it's Steely Dan or Faith No More or Bach or Charlie Parker or Mingus or whatever. Something comes into clear focus when I'm listening to, or Sondheim, musical theater. And there's a clarity and there's an ease.
Yeah.
So that's what happens for me in the theater realm. And similarly with, quote unquote, coaching people or doing the mental chiropractic thing, as I kind of cheekily call it. That's my aim. In the course of the hour, the first thing I do with someone when we're taking a walk is, what's your intention for this walk? And we take the first 10, 15 minutes to really drill down to what are you actually intending? And, often then we have to go through a few layers. Like, well, I really want to be more confident. Like, cool. So wanting is wanting. What's your intention for this conversation? What are we going to cause? What kind of shift are we going to cause? Similarly to, you go to see a regular chiropractor. What's bothering you? What's stuck? What would you like to see move? Oh, it's my lower back. It's the left side. It's sort of up here, So we hone in on an intention, and then my intention is that intention be fulfilled for that person, and I help as we're walking, which, as you said, can get you into a flow state, and you're breathing fresh air, and you're moving your body. I'm there to say whatever comes to mind for me, what I can see about what's keeping them stuck in a counter-intentional state. Essentially, what's preventing their true intention, which they've just stated, from coming into existence. And then I offer them a possible different point of view. They try it on. If they like it, they keep it.
When you speak of that version of clarity, could you use the term perspective?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, what did Obi-Wan Kenobi, back to Star Wars, what did Obi-Wan say, what did Ghost Obi-Wan say to Luke in Return of the Jedi? You're going to find, Luke, that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. Mm-hmm. Right? Luke was like, a certain point of view?
Right.
And he's like, yeah. And you always have a view. This is what we don't tend to see. And again, none of this is original to me. I've learned this from the various personal development things I've done and mentors of mine who teach this stuff. But what I've become clear on is we always have a view. We're always looking through a view. And it's either kind of a clear view or it's a smudged view. But we don't see the smudges, and we don't even know that we have a view. We think we're seeing how it is. So if I'm dealing with, if you and I are friends and we're having a conflict and I'm talking to you and you just look like a stubborn idiot to me, right? Because you won't see it my way.
Now.
That's all I'm seeing.
Stubborn idiot.
Now, but what I don't see is that's what I'm seeing. What I think I'm seeing is stubborn idiot, but there's actually a virtual reality helmet on. Now, you can't take it off until you admit that it's on.
Right.
You can't disown something until you own it. So, yeah, perspective. And so for me, it's not about like positive thinking or giving someone a better perspective. But first of all, what's your current working perspective? What lens are you looking through? And if it helps you to feel a little better about it, how long have you had that perspective? And this is where it's kind of similar to my dad's stuff. He'll say, is this the first time you felt that way? And I can sometimes say, was that the first time you've looked at life that way? No, this is a template. It's always a template. It's always familiar. But people have to see that for themselves.
Right.
I can't just tell them that.
Right.
And then we can say, okay, cool. That's the current perspective. And the current perspective 100% gives you your current experience. It's just like front of the hand, back of the hand. When you have that point of view, you have the experience you're having. Nothing wrong with it, but if you want a different experience, let's look at some different points of view that might balance better on the cost-benefit ledger.
Right. Bring a little bit more alignment.
Exactly. Alignment. And alignment with what? Alignment with your intention, alignment with your purpose, alignment with why you're here. Because we're all here for a limited time.
Very limited.
And that creates stakes.
Right.
As one of my great friends and teachers says, that this alignment is, we're aligning with our calling, with our purpose. And that purpose is created by the fact that our lives are time bound.
You mentioned freedom.
Yeah.
What does freedom mean to you?
It's a good question. Well, freedom, I think, it means not being impinged, not being constrained artificially, the absence of unnatural restraints. I mean, because for instance, there are restraints all the time. Gravity is a restraint. But I'm walking down the street, I don't experience it as a drag on my freedom that I don't float up into the atmosphere. That's just a constraint that I live inside of.
True. Yep.
Now the Wright brothers did experience it as a constraint. They noticed that human beings are constrained by not being, so they did something about it. They created flight, if they're actually the ones who invented it, right? So it's all relative. But what the restraints I'm talking about is I have an intention, and again, it comes down to what I'm here for. What am I here for? Well, if I'm here for freedom and clarity, or if I'm here for love and connection, or if I'm here for, and each of us has our own particular kind of taste bud for what turns us on the most. And that's kind of, let's say that's what we're here for. Well, if that's what I'm here for, then anything structural in my way of looking at things that prevents me from experiencing that under any circumstance whatsoever is not freedom. And freedom would be, now, then there's external freedom too. There's political freedom, which is being free from external constraints. So not being jailed for your beliefs or all of this kind of thing. And that's an important kind of freedom too. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the space where, because there's political prisoners, there's people who survived Auschwitz. Who wrote Man's Search for Meaning? Victor Frankl.
Victor Frankl, yeah.
Yeah, that is a man who was free.
Yep.
And Hurricane Carter was free.
Well, I really liked how he created what he calls an internal locus of control.
Yes.
Right, and that's basically how he maintained a level of control even though he was in a concentration camp.
Now, to some people, that might sound like a cruel mindfuck. Like, what locus of, what are you going to control? Well, he's controlling his experience.
Yeah.
The quality of his experience and the quality of his internal state of freedom. So yeah, that's what freedom is to me. And there's all kinds of ways that we trade in our freedom for something else, like certainty, like being right, like comfort. And there's always that hunger, I think, though, to be free. I think it's it's part of our human nature.
What advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
Great
it's a fun
question.
one, right?
Well, let me just remember who my 25-year-old self was, because I've had a lot of different versions of this operating system. 25 years old was the year 2000. I was subletting a place on Commercial Drive, and I was recording my album Through These Parts Alone. That was my singer-songwriter album.
Yeah.
I think I would tell him, you're doing it, man. It gets better. This is all worth it. And it's going to take a while, man. It's just going to take a while for you. That's just how it is. And you don't need to call that being a late bloomer. You don't need to make that wrong. And you certainly don't need to absorb or buy into anyone else's, your parents or anyone else's fundamental existential concerns about you, about whether it's going to work out. It's going to work out. And the more you can just relax into the process and trust your gut and trust that, the people who get you and really support you, that feels good for a reason. That's healthy. Call more of that into your life. And then, I would sort of send him props from the future and saying, you have gifts in you and resources that you don't even know yet, and you're going to be just fine.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I think those gifts are starting to come out now.
They've been,
they're there.
They're coming into harmony with each other. They're starting to have a conversation with each other, and they're starting to. They've been coming up for a while. As far as writing musical theater is a gift, and I've been honored for. I've been given awards for how good I am at that, right? It's a talent. And I always thought that was my gift. My talents were my gifts, but that was not free for me. Because if my talents are my gifts, then I got to be on all the time. I got to be impressing people with my way with words and my cleverness with music and whatever else.
Interesting.
Not free. The source of my freedom is what I said about freedom and clarity, that's what I'm actually here for, whether it's through music or through writing books with my dad or workshops or going for walks with people, or maybe doing none of the above 2 years from now. Maybe I'm going to just be a hermit in the woods, and that'll be how I express it. But what's happening now is that there's a executive consciousness, like the head of Voltron is on, you know, Optimus Prime, I guess, or whoever is at the top. And it's like, okay, dudes, we're working together. We know what we're creating. You're for this, you're for that. Cool. No part of me, no appendage of me is trying to run the show. And I have a sense now of what is aligned and what is not aligned. I know what alignment feels like. I know what not alignment feels like. You know, losing my marriage was maybe the final lesson I had to learn in terms of something had to fall apart, and I had to really have my heart broken. And when I say that, I don't mean that someone broke my heart. I mean, life broke my heart.
Right.
And I lost something that I thought I was going to have forever. I lost something I was very attached to, something I thought I couldn't live without. And discovering that not only can I live without it, but in fact it had to go for me to fully come into my wholeness. And also the shift between, I think for a long time in my 20s and 30s, and I came by this honestly because of the family I'm from, the focus was on healing the trauma. And at a certain point, maybe even in the past year, I'm no longer as interested in healing for myself. I don't begrudge anyone else their healing. Healing is important. But now it's about wholeness. And healing and wholeness, even though they have the same root, the words have the same etymological root, it's a different domain. Wholeness is coming into what was already there. And it was always there. And you spoke about medicines. I had a transcendent experience, shall we say. I never know if
it happens.
Who's
you
going to
can
be
call it a mystical experience, whatever.
A mystical experience, yeah. You know, I don't think the authorities of certain countries are listening to this podcast. And
I think it's okay.
Yeah. You never know. But the first words out of my mouth after I was in the ceremonial space were, I've been perfectly preserved. I saw myself as a Jurassic fly stuck in amber that had been perfectly preserved all this time. My soul, essentially, my essence. And it had nothing to do with my personality. It had nothing to do with my accomplishments. It had nothing to do with how good I was at this or that. There's an essence there that never got touched. And there was just this relief, this rest, this place of rest. And it's, you know, A Course in Miracles talks about that, the profound innocence of each of us. And every spiritual tradition talks about
the divine spark within everyone.
Right, and the divine, who could fuck with the divine spark? You're not going to mess with the divine spark. you can't sully the divine spark.
Nope.
The divine spark is, I am that I am, right?
Is there anything else you'd like to get out there today?
Oh.
Feel free to plug away.
Well, walkwithdaniel.com is where people can go if they want to, you know, and you can book a 15-minute session, like a free consult with me if you want to sort of have a conversation about,
is it the right fit?
Is it the right fit? And, you know, is this issue I'm dealing with in my life? And just so people know, this is not a long-term therapy relationship. I'm not trying to work with people for months on end. I hope never to see you again. Right. Not never, but I hope
you can do that in one session.
Absolutely.
Boom,
Now, it's not like it's one and done, but maybe when you come back, you'll have a different thing on your mind.
Right.
Because I'm trying to shift something chiropractically with the principles of chiropractic, right?
Right.
So yeah, you know, people can do that, and there's a mailing list, and they can write to me if they have any questions. And you know, if money is an issue, all I want is people to put skin in the game and honor my time. I'm not a stickler because I want it to be accessible. Actually, I want it to be more accessible than therapy is.
Cool.
And therapy's great. I'm not slagging it. I'm in therapy sometimes. I have a musical which I'm not ready to give news about, but I think there will be news about it soon. But maybe by the time this goes up, but it's not ready to announce
Very
yet.
cool.
And then, helloagainproject.com is where my dad and I's work is, and you can join our mailing list. Oh, and we're going to have we're launching our own podcast soon.
Amazing.
Oh, yeah.
What's it going to be called?
Awesome.
Hello Again.
Perfect.
Fresh start for parents and their adult children.
I will
Very
be
good.
listening.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Yeah, and we're going to have interviews, and we're going to
Do you have
listen
a
to music together and do
Tentative
movie
release
reviews.
of that?
Sometime in the next month.
Cool.
But I've been saying that for a couple of months.
Okay.
Don't
Do you have
listen
some
to a word I say.
pre-recorded episodes?
We have one, and I just have to edit it.
Yeah.
Right.
Perfect. Very nice.
Very
And
good.
what about the book? The
yes.
co-authoring.
Right. So
You've been hearing about this book since, for
well,
almost
it
4
sounds like
years
it's
now.
my
mutated
dad's-
a little bit.
The first one, my dad's been kind of like he's been pregnant with it for a long time, and I'm kind of helping him midwife it. That's called The Myth of Normal: Illness
Okay.
and Health in an Insane Culture.
Okay.
Nice.
And as you can tell, that's kind of his magnum opus, I think. That's,
Yes.
or at least so far, that's going to bring together all of his work. And
Okay.
we're writing that in the next 18 months. That should come out in
2020-ish?
2020, 2021.
Okay.
And then a year after that, Hello Again.
Okay.
Which is co-authored by us.
Awesome.
And then
Beautiful.
the Jordan Peterson, Gabor Maté event is happening.
I'm not organizing it.
Not organizing.
Someone else can take that one on.
Okay.
I honestly think they'd have more in common than they have
Probably.
different.
Yeah.
But anyways, that was amazing.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My
And
total
I'd
pleasure.
love you to do this again when you're back in town.
Oh my God.
There's
In
so
a
much
heartbeat.
knowledge you dropped in this podcast. It's incredible. The apple definitely doesn't fall too far from the tree with you.
That's a good thing.
So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, guys.
And anything else you'd like to get out there today, Mike?
No, just as well. Thank you. It's kind of nice to have finally to round out that trifecta that we were talking
Yes.
about before.
Yeah, and then of course I have two siblings who I can't speak for them.
Oh, we
but
need to
maybe,
go the
maybe you'll have reason to have them.
Quin-
on
Why don't we
someday.
just have the whole
Quinfecta.
family on?
Well,
Yeah, well, my mom is a trip. You should have my mama.
Oh, yeah.
Local artist, married to Gabor Maté for 49
That's
years.
true.
We-
I'm sure
we
she has
should
a
just
couple
create
stories.
a roundtable podcast.
Well,
and
did you see
just-
recently that Will Smith family roundtable thing they
No.
did? It was actually really, really cool.
Wow,
And
you just copy Will Smith.
well, copy him, but
I've
you guys.
always been a big
there
believer.
could be a
in
Maté
parents
thing.
just don't understand.
Oh yeah.
Well,
it's
Well, of course he's now the shoe's on the other foot now for him.
Exactly.
indeed.
Anyway, thanks
All
guys.
right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for listening today. If you like what you heard, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. Comment, share, do all that good
all
social
helps.
media jam stuff.
Yes.
If you'd like to give floating a try, use the promo code VancouverReal. Receive 20% off a single float. Website is floathouse.ca. And then we have VancouverReal.tv, AndyZaremba.com, mantalks.com, and mindfulmass.org. That's everything.
That's it. That's it.
And you're on Instagram as Floating Yogi.
I am on Instagram,
And I'm on
that's
Instagram as Andy Zaremba. So thank you all for listening, and until next time,
to whatever is.
to whatever is.